And I say to the people who work with them, when you've got a 1 being critical of you, the first thing you can do, just as a human being who's learning the Enneagram, is stop and think to yourself. Every time, you got to just keep reminding yourself that whatever the 1 is giving you, it is first and worst on themselves. So they've beat themselves up first before they've brought anything up to you.
From Tyler Technologies, it's the Tyler Tech Podcast, where we talk about issues facing communities today and do so in a way that's both entertaining and enlightening. I'm your host, Jeff Harrell. I'm the Director of Content Marketing for Tyler Technologies. I'm very excited about this episode because it's part 2 of our conversation about the Enneagram. Joey Schewee is a teacher, she's a school administrator, and she is an absolute Enneagram expert. If you listen to the episode part 1, you got a great introduction into the Enneagram. We take it a step higher today. We talk about the Enneagram at a PhD level. You're going to get a lot of great information. So if you're interested in the Enneagram, if you work on a team, if you're part of a family or part of a group, I think you'll find this information very helpful. With no further ado, we're going to jump right into my conversation with Joey Schewee. 1's a reformer. Is that correct?
Or a perfectionist, either one.
Or perfectionist, okay. And 2 is a helper.
Helper, that's the best name for a 2.
Okay, and then 6 would be the loyalist.
Yes. Loyalist or devil's advocate. 6s, and this is where let's just actually start with 6s, because we ended with 3s where you've got someone who's feeling, since they're on the triangle, they're taking in information with feeling, 3s are, but not processing with feeling. So they're the most out of touch with their own feelings. 6s are thinking all the time. They're thinking dominant. What happens with a 6 is they're on a hamster wheel in their mind, because 6s cannot help but think of every possible scenario. Often that manifests itself as worst case scenario thinking. There's some fear that goes with that, but it's really more of a belief. 6s kind of believe that the world is a slippery slope and that people have hidden agendas, and they can't help that their brain works that way. So what they're doing is making a plan for every single thing that could possibly happen.
And is that in both a healthy and unhealthy state, or is that kind of skew more to the unhealthy? Both.
No, healthy and unhealthy. So and interestingly enough, for all of these numbers, for 1s, 2s, and 6s, their reference point is outside of themselves on what's happening. And so what you teach that's so important for 1s, 2s, and 6s is very often other people are setting the agenda for the lives of 1s, 2s, and 6s, because their reference point is on you or on the situation. And these numbers, this is where productive thinking is not always accessed. These numbers have a tendency to naturally look to the situation to see what should happen next. You and I, Jeff, along with 3s, we can absolutely, something could be blowing up next to us, and we can stand independent from it. We can choose to be a part of it, but we can just as easily stand independent from it. 1s, 2s, and 6s cannot, because their reference point is on what's happening. So these 3 numbers feel responsible for making the world a better place.
Got it.
And so these 3 numbers flock to education, healthcare, ministry.
Yep.
Like if I go into a school staff and teach, or I go to a church staff and teach, or a medical staff and teach, and I've done all 3, easily half the room will be dependent stance numbers, 1s, 2s, and 6s.
Nonprofits as well?
Because those are the numbers. Say it again. Absolutely nonprofits.
Yep.
Absolutely.
I bet government too. I would think government would probably be full of them as well. Just
I think helping, a lot of them,
helping the public. Yeah, yes. Public servants.
Yeah, absolutely. What's unique to 1s? Let's talk about these 1s and 2s a little bit. What's unique to 1s, and they'll definitely say they're thinking all the time. 1s are the 1 number on the Enneagram who has an internal critic, and they were born with the critic, and they absolutely know it when I teach it. They're usually pretty surprised to find out that that not everybody has that internal critic.
Ooh.
And it's never supportive. The critic is never supportive for ones. It's you messed that up. You blew that whole presentation. Ones cannot send an email and not think about it for hours after. So that's that needing to bring up productive thinking. When I go in and I teach, you just like I got to bring up feeling, you guys have to bring up productive thinking. And that's a big thing for ones is once they push send or once they have a conversation, once they're criticizing themselves on everything they did. These ones are driven for perfection. They want things to be perfect. And so they are, one of the ways that manifests is ones are always making lists for themselves. And they're kind enough to make lists for the rest of us, those of us in their lives as well. And these ones are often surprised if you accuse them of being critical because they're offering to the rest of us just a fraction of what they deal with all the time internally. All the time. It is unceasing. And so I have ones tell me all the time, it's just so exhausting. Like that's what they want to relate to people is how exhausting it is, right? To have that going on all the time. And I usually, when I'm teaching with people who work with ones who have probably been pretty critical of them, I first highlight the fact that because ones are dependent, because their reference point is on their coworkers, eights have no idea how we are impacting you. Ones absolutely know how they're impacting you. They see it, they read it, but for them, striving for perfection. Like if you could just do it this way, you would see it. So things have to be done in a certain order. There is a step. There's one right way to do things. If you're a one, very, very black and white thinkers, those ones, right? And I say to the people who work with them, when you've got a one being critical of you, the first thing you can do, just as a human being who's learning the Enneagram, is stop and think to yourself. Every time, you got to just keep reminding yourself that whatever the one is giving you, it is first and worst on themselves. So they've beat themselves up first before they've brought anything up to you.
Wow.
And when I'm asking, what I'm asking sixes to do when I'm saying work on bringing up thinking is almost every single worst case scenario that you made a plan for, because sixes don't just think about the worst thing that could happen. They make a plan. So I taught a 20-something about a year ago in Jackson, Mississippi, who talked about being a little girl and driving around Jackson, Mississippi and thinking. What she was doing was mapping the city because her worst case thought was if she got kidnapped and put into the trunk of a car.
Wow.
She would get out of the trunk and then know how to get home.
Oh my goodness.
So that's how that manifests. Yeah, she didn't just sit around and think, oh, what if I get kidnapped? It's, here's my plan.
Yeah.
So sixes cannot help that's that hamster wheel that they're on. I have them tell me all the time that they have paralysis by analysis. They doubt themselves. Sixes are the one number who doubts themselves. And so they look to authority, right? They're the ones in your organizations who have read the employee handbook cover to cover. It's tabbed, it's page, and they're checking to see if you as the leaders are following that, and everyone else. Like that's where their reference point is outside of them. Okay. But they're the true team player. Like sixes are all about rolling up their sleeves for the good of the organization.
I was going to ask what role is good for sixes. Is it like a planning kind of a role would be great for a six because they're already planning, or would that drive them crazy?
Here's where planning gets tough for dependent numbers. So our orientation to time for each of our numbers is based on our stance. So you and me and threes, sevens, eights, and threes in the aggressive stance, our orientation to time is the future. That's where we think. So we're big on planning. We're actually the three numbers who are big on planning.
Got it.
I always caution threes and remind them that they're really the only number who just lives and dies by goals. So if you've got a three manager who's all about having goal meetings with their employees, that's not working. That goal meetings put a lot of stress on ones, twos, and sixes because that's so far in the future. And their orientation to time, ones, twos, and sixes, is the present. And so while sixes are great in compliance, sixes and ones are great in compliance. Sixes are great if the planning is what could happen, And what is our, if all of these scenarios happen, what's our plan going to be? Yes, they would be great in those roles. Where employers get frustrated with 6s, their questions. So 1s, 2s, and 6s, all 3 numbers in the dependent stance, they ask questions. They're the big question askers. 6s ask the most. For all 3 numbers, though, we have a tendency when we don't know the Enneagram and we're being questioned by a 1, a 2, or a 6, we have a tendency to think they're questioning us. That's not what it is. They are checking their own thinking very often. Very, very often. That's what's happening.
Do 6s start with, what happens if ...
Very often. Very often.
Okay.
And they're going to have 50 like that. I mean, 6s are going to ask questions. It is when you're dealing with 3 numbers who don't think on the fly and who want to check their own gathered information before they come up with their own opinion, which happens a lot with all 3 numbers, but mainly 6s. It does them a horrible disservice to not send an agenda for the meeting you're going to have. That's just a simple thing that helps when you're working with 1s, 2s, and 6s. Send the meeting agenda ahead of time. For those 3 numbers, they can have thought about what they want to contribute and what they think about those things.
That's great advice. That's great.
Yeah. And then I have 2s. Oh, those 2s. Okay. 2s are the litmus test. I think all 3 numbers could be the litmus test for your office. Billy and I teach that dependent stance children are the litmus test for your house because their reference point is on what's happening in the house. If that kid's not okay, it's possible that something in the house isn't okay. For the office, though, you need that 2 who cannot help but feel what everyone else is feeling, who can tell you how everyone else is doing. Like, I move so fast. I'm just not on that level relationally, and you need a 2 who can kind of help make sure that everyone in the office is okay. So I do a lot of work with Crest Industries in Louisiana. They're a big industrial company, and their head of HR is a 2. She's working with presidents from 10 different companies in this umbrella organization. She is really good at when big things roll out. She's really good at reading how it hits the managers, and she kind of comes back to the chief operating officer and president, who's a 1, and kind of says, okay, this, you got to go back to this person. So 2s are great at knowing who's doing well and who's not. The thing that 2s that gets in their own way all the time, where productive thinking is lost, is 2s are the 1 number who actually feels what the person in front of them is feeling. They pick it up and feel it themselves.
Yep.
And then for them, thinking is last and doing is second. So what a 2 does is they feel your feeling, and then doing supports that. So they feel like they have to do something about what they feel. And they're doing it all the time, feeling and doing and feeling and doing.
Yep.
Bringing up thinking for a 2 is such good work, because all it is helping them realize that the thing they're doing that they felt like they had to do was probably based in a feeling that wasn't even their own to begin with. Wasn't even their own. I say to spouses of 2s all the time, when that 2 or of parents of 2s coming home and just relaying all these feelings, and it seems like it's just such a burden, 70 to 80% of those feelings that they're unpacking were never their own to begin with.
Interesting.
So very helpful, and we'll end the dependent stance with this. I give 2s. It doesn't work for any other number like it works for 2s. But 3 questions for 2s to ask themselves that help them bring up thinking, which they need to do, is when they're getting ready to do something they're motivated to do because they felt like they needed to do it. The 3 questions they need to ask are, what is my agenda in helping this person? What's my agenda? Number 2, what, if anything, do I expect in return? So do I expect something in return? And I got to remind 2s often that just having the person like you is expecting something in return. And then the 3rd question that often 2s like to skip right on over, but it's very important, is, does the other person want my help? Because often they're just doing, and they're exhausted. These 2s are exhausted. And often they get to, midlife and they're just tired. They're completely beat because they have spent a lifetime doing for others because they felt motivated by just picking up that feeling. So bringing up thinking is good for, productive thinking is good for all three of those numbers.
Got it.
And then our last three are withdrawing stance. Those are 4s, 5s, and 9s. So you got 4s who are in the feeling dominant stance with 2s and 3s. 5s who are in in triad, feeling dominant triad with 2s and 3s. 5s who join you in 6s in the thinking dominant triad, and 9s that's your last triangle number. So they're doing dominant with me and 1s, and these numbers are doing all the time. So 9s are doing all the time, but it's usually what they like or what they want to do. Well, and sometimes that leaves what needs to be done for these three numbers. My husband, Billy, is a 9. He is getting his doctorate in education. I mean, he's about to be Dr. Schewee. So it's not that he's not doing, but when he crosses the stage, in his graduate hood, and you say, Dr. Schewee, that's amazing. What are you going to do with this? He will likely look at you and say, I have no idea. Do you have any good ideas? So 9s, it's not that they're not doing, these 9s who are doing dominant and doing least access. There's not a ton of direction with these 9s in their doing. All right.
Got it. And I was just going to define the numbers real quick. So 4 is an individualist. Is that the accurate term for that one?
Yes, I think individualist is a good term for 4s.
Okay. And 5 is the investigator.
Definitely.
And then 9, my wife is actually 9, the peacemaker.
Peacemaker is great.
Okay, awesome.
Peacemaker's very good for those three. So for these three numbers, doing is least accessed for them. And what actually happens, so they're withdrawing. So while if something's blowing up right over here and you and me, 3s, 8s, and 7s can stand independent from it, 1s, 2s, and 6s can't help but be on it. That's where their reference point is. Well, 4s, 5s, and 9s can just withdraw from it. And these numbers are all natural withdrawers. So while 3s, 7s, and 8s in the aggressive stance have the most energy on the Enneagram, 4s, 5s, and 9s have the least.
Interesting.
As a group, 9s in that group have the least. So 9s have the least energy on the Enneagram. And that's something that has been so helpful to know just navigating married life for me with a 9. Like I have just abounding energy, and for Billy to stay present for the conversation, for the day, for the job, everything like that it's a lot of intentionality, and it actually takes a lot of work for a 9.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that? Because when you say energy, are you
Sure.
are you talking about, because my wife is a 9, is going all the time, but she withdraws very quickly. Are you saying relational energy? Or are you talking about physical energy? Or are we talking like...
It's usually physical energy.
Okay.
Like all three numbers have to have alone time.
Yep.
She has to have hers.
Well,
I'm sure she has her ways of getting it.
people will drain her of energy. So maybe that's where we see it. Okay.
Yes. And that's usually what happens. Because there were naturally withdrawing numbers, people drain all of these numbers. All right.
Okay. Got it. Yep.
The number they drain the most, actually, because I think a lot of nines will relate that they get energy from being around others and being in groups. Pretty much across the board, the number that is drained by other people is your thinking dominant, investigating fives. Fives are absolutely in their head. And while eights have the most energy and nines have the least energy, fives are the one number on the Enneagram who has a set amount. So when I describe it, I like to describe it as a savings account, a bank account, or a gas tank, okay? And some accounts might be larger than others, but all fives have the same, for them, just finite amount. And what drains that the fastest is being around other people. And certain people drain it much faster than others. So the fives in your life, if they're your spouse, want to know when something begins, when a social engagement begins, and they want to know when it ends. Because what fives are doing, who intuitively know this about themselves, this is what I love about fives. Well, about Enneagram in general. Like, all of this is intuitive work. You've been living this way. This just gives an explanation to it. So these 5s compartmentalize their energy because they have a set amount. And so job, it's like they mentally allot a certain amount of energy for their job, a certain amount for their family, a certain amount for social engagements. When they get to empty, there is no getting it back until they are alone, completely alone, to fill back up. And they know this about themselves. So when they're asking when it begins and when it ends, and they want to know who's going to be there, that's because for them, it's a mental math for how do I have enough energy to do this. 5s that work with you want to know when the meeting starts and when it ends often, and they'll often want to know who's going to be there. They're so analytical. And the gift that 5s bring to organizations is that they're the most neutral of all the numbers. So 9s are your peacemaker, and what they're really good at is harmonizing conflicting points of view. Like, that's the gift that 9s bring. What 5s bring is they are completely neutral. So they can have an opinion and have a feeling connected to it, but they can detach from that. They're very, very good at that, just naturally. And that's part of just that thinking dominant investigative 5. And then 4s. 4s are the most unique and complex number on the Enneagram. There are fewer 4s than any other number, and they are very complex. And what they really want, their driving force, is to be understood. So if you read or see something somewhere that says they want to be special, that's a little too surface. What 4s actually want, they feel like they don't quite fit naturally.
Got it.
And so they feel first, and they think second, and they do last. And so it leaves them in a world of feelings when you're a withdrawn number who's thinking and feeling all the time. So the way I like to describe it is a 4, having our 14-year-old is a self-identified 4. And I am so grateful for the Enneagram as an 8, because if I did not know the Enneagram, I would have spent the last 14 years feeling like my 14-year-old 4 son was just ungrateful all the time.
Oh, wow.
Because 4s cannot help but see what's missing. They can't help it. 4s are comfortable with melancholy. That does not mean they walk around as depressed, but they're comfortable with melancholy. Too happy doesn't seem quite right to them. And they always, always, always see what's missing. They can't help it.
Wow.
And that's happening in your office. But their contributions are so unique and real. They're very authentic. So authenticity is a big thing for 4s. They sniff out inauthentic very quickly, and they don't have any energy for that. And so they have a lot of space for people. Like, 4s just have a lot of space for everyone else, because they're walking around thinking, I'm missing it. You all got something that I just didn't get. It's kind of that thing. They have this internal sense that they're missing something, and they won't be complete until they find it or they get it. And that's almost like a lifelong thing with 4s.
Wow. Interesting.
But for all 3 of these withdrawing numbers, where doing is least access, because they're withdrawing and because their reference point is internal, all 3 of these numbers, and I know this has happened with your wife, Jeff, all 3 of these numbers think that they talk and engage more than they actually do. So, one of my favorite stories, Billy and I, when he's an only child and I come from a big family, and as we were dating, we would leave being with my family. And I would say, babe, do you like my family? Like, you didn't say much. And Billy's response was, I said a ton. I said a lot. Well, he had conversations with everyone in his head. Half of those words never left his mouth. Like, all 4s, 5s, and 9s, they have all kinds of conversations with you in their head. And a lot of the times those words aren't actually leaving their brain to actually engage with you.
Interesting. I totally see that with my life for sure.
Yeah.
Well, awesome, man. This is such great information. I didn't really understand the stances before, so this has been helpful for me, even though I knew a little bit about the Enneagram. Can we maybe hit real quickly just each number and maybe just one or 2 words about, maybe a healthy one, unhealthy one, just so people can kind of have a quick reference at the end of this?
So I'll kind of stay more average,
Perfect.
Healthy and average space.
Yep, perfect.
And we'll go in stance order just to keep it consistent. Are you good with that?
I'm perfect with that. Yep.
So your 8s are your take charge people. They're going to see exactly what needs to be done, and they're going to have a lot of energy to do it. In just average space, I need people to understand that 8s do not realize the impact they have. So they're running over you and hurting your feelings, and they are not intending to. That's a big thing to note about 8s. And they are reticent, some of them, to do this kind of work to bring up feeling because they didn't mean to hurt your feelings. So that's on you. Yeah. It's kind of what happens with these 8s, right? Like that's you, that your work to deal with if I hurt your feelings because I didn't mean to. So that's kind of what you're dealing with 8s, I think. 7s are bringing so much positive energy to everything. They're big ideas, they're big planners, they're big futurists, and they bring a lot of fun and positivity. A 7 who is not in that space, 7s they want to do what's fun for them. And so what I'm cautioning 7s to watch is when they aren't being considerate of other people's thoughts or plans or ideas or agendas, and if that's what the bigger group wants to go with, 7s are withdrawing their fun energy. And it's like the air being sucked out of the room. Yep. The room. I mean, you almost kind of catch your breath with it. That's tough to deal with if you're the 7 who's normally bringing a lot of the energy to what's happening in an impactful way. You've got to start opening up that there are other options and other agendas without withdrawing your energy. And I think 7s do that. It's never manipulative and it's never conscious. You don't think, well, I'm not going to, you don't think I'm withdrawing my energy now. It's not what you wanted to do. And so it leaves a void. Yep. It leaves a void. Yep. And I think frenetic planning, 7s just need to watch that frenetic planning, going from one thing to the next without finishing.
That is me.
All right.
That is me to a T.
3s, I tell you, it is a huge gift to be able to do based on a reaction that you see in the way someone feels. It is dangerous to not look at your own feelings. And usually the feelings that 3s are, when you find a pretty average to unhealthy 3, that 3 is all image, is not doing internal work. I think Enneagram work is the toughest to do if you are a 3, because Enneagram work in general requires looking inside and observing. And 3s are not naturally wired to do that. Wow. So what they usually quickly kind of bury and turn away from are feelings of shame and anger and disappointment and embarrassment. And we all grow when we work through those. So 3s who actually can go through the discomfort of looking inside and doing some Enneagram work will be able to offer the world so much more because it will be more authentic. Because an unhealthy 3 is very surface, it's all about image, and there's not much behind it. And then 1s, 2s, and 6s. 1s are great with details. They are all in the details, and they are phenomenal with that. They're great with process. They're great with setting up processes for something to be successful. 1s have got to get on board that there is more than one way to do something. If you let go a little bit, other people will rise to some good levels. 1s who aren't very healthy, who are in the average unhealthy space, two things are happening. They're getting caught up in minor details and expending a lot of energy on that. And 1s across the world are getting angry at work and stuffing it because it wouldn't be good to be angry at work, and they're taking that home and they are unloading it on their families. Wow. Just kind of watch that anger, because it's a real thing. 2s, man, you're exhausted, you're tired all the time, and it's because you're doing for others based on what you're feeling, but it was not your feeling to begin with. So at their best, 2s are warm and intuitive and generous, and so they just know. They're almost empathic. They know exactly what you need. And that's great. 2s, when you're in average to unhealthy space, you can be manipulative, you can be martyring, That's kind of twos. When you know you're not in a good space, you're slipping into martyrdom. Like, I do all of this for you and you're not giving to me.
Okay.
And what's helpful for twos to realize is they sense what we need and give it to us before we even ask. That's what they're good at. So we ascribe to the world how we are. So what twos do when they're tired is they think that those around them who they've sensed and given to are going to, number one, sense what they need and then give. And we don't, because we're not twos, so we don't sense it, and the two gets their feelings hurt. So twos need to see that not everyone senses. It is terrifying for a two to ask for what they want or what they need, but they need to. That will end up being very freeing for them. Sixes, I would think that this is a very tough time for sixes, because they are used to, in one way, they were prepared for this, what we're dealing with right now, right? Because they had thought of it and they were prepared. At the same time, two things are happening that is causing sixes a lot of stress. There is no one authority saying this is what we should do.
Yep.
And they're already struggling with their own inner doubt, okay? And six's reference point is on everybody else. When a six is going to the supermarket, anywhere, and not everybody's wearing the face mask, not everyone's following all the rules, sixes are losing a lot of precious energy in that, their reference point being on everyone not doing what they should be doing. And sixes need to kind of watch if they're getting lost in that. Sixes, man, at your best, you are the true team player. You are such a good voice in your family and in your job because you're the one number who has considered everybody in the room. I don't think any other number does that, but sixes do that really well. And then our withdrawing numbers, 4s, 5s, and 9s. 4s, you at your best, you are just wonderfully creative human beings. And you bring our 14-year-old is just an old soul. He just brings something such depth. 4s bring a lot of depth to what we do. And that's a good space. 4s, you'll know you're in average to unhealthy space when you are engaged in push-pull. You're the one number who does it. And what happens with you 4s is you see that one thing, and it's a person, a place, a job, that could be the thing that could finally complete you. And as it gets closer, you see that it's flawed and missing something. And so you push it or ignore it in some way. And then as whatever it is kind of slips away a little, then you start to pull at it again. And 4s, when you're in an unhealthy space, you're doing that like on steroids. It's very intense and it's much more rapid. So just kind of watch that. 5s, you've got to watch not going so deep in the hole that nobody hears from you at all. Because this is actually kind of a decent space for you to be withdrawn. But so much of the energy that you get is from thinking and sharing your ideas and your thoughts with others. So don't become the recluse. 5s who are in a healthy space can bring that neutrality to something, and they can share their thoughts and ideas, and they have so much unexpected for the rest of us information on everything kind of neatly tucked away. 5s, you need to watch when you're in unhealthy to average space, because doing is least access for you and thinking is dominant. Your feelings support your thoughts. And so 5s, you need to watch when you share your thoughts with someone and we disagree. You need to watch when you take that personally, because we're disagreeing with your thought, not with you. You need to watch that. And then 9s. You are so important in the world because you see both sides to everything. You bring so much because you consider both sides. When things happen, you're the last person to give an idea or offer a thought, and you should be one of the first, because you actually have a wonderful way of seeing from all sides that not everybody brings to the table. 9s, you need to watch that what drives you is your desire to avoid conflict, most importantly, but also to avoid being affected by the situation. And you can be stubborn, nines, in your insistence on not being affected by what's happening. When you find yourselves kind of digging in your heels to not let what is outside of you affect you, that's probably a tap on the shoulder that you might need to kind of recenter. And not all conflict is bad, and not everything is conflictual. The things that nines think would be conflictual fascinate me. Yeah. So nines, you defer. I say Billy Schewee defers to a fault sometimes to avoid conflict. So just watch that.
Joey, this is awesome. And I know you can go super deep on this stuff, and obviously you're passionate about this. If people want to learn more, are there some good resources that they can go to even learn more?
Absolutely. I'm going to share my belief that I think written indicators are dangerous. They could be a good jumping off point. I think written indicators often get us in the right stance, maybe, but because this is not a behavior thing, it's a motivation thing. So many written indicators out there are asking you questions about your behavior. Yep. And not questions about your motivation. So, Jeff, you and I could answer a lot of questions the same way, right? But we are motivated very differently, right? Yep. So I say one of the best primer out there, it's bestseller in multiple countries, is The Road Back to You. Yep. So that's my mom's book that she wrote with Ian Cron, and that's a great primer. That's a great first place to start. My mom, I would push her podcast as well. She's got the Enneagram Journey. If you just pick an episode, and what she does is she talks with that person about being that number. It's a great way in 20 minutes to an hour to kind of have a touchstone with what you think your number might be. So those would be the two, both of my moms. The Road Back to You or her Enneagram Journey podcast.
Love it. And if people wanted to connect with you, what's the best way that they can do that?
They can go through the Life in the Trinity Ministry website, or they can just email me, and it's joey@lifeinthetrinityministry.com.
Awesome. Very cool. Joey, thank you so much for your time and your expertise.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it.
It's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it. And it's great having teachers on here teaching us things, and the Enneagram is certainly one that I think is important for a lot of people. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. I've really enjoyed studying the Enneagram. It's really helped me understand how I behave and are motivated, and how people in my team and people in my family behave and are motivated. So I hope you found that very, very helpful. Hey, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. We really appreciate it. One thing that you can do is go out and give us a review wherever you listen to this podcast. We would really appreciate that. And until next time, this is Jeff Harrell, Director of Content Marketing with Tyler Technologies. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you soon.